Thank you. Honourable members, the House is resumed. Kia ora tātou no reira te whare. Inga iwi, inga rio, inga hawe wha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Honourable members, prior to the dinner break at 6 o'clock, the Honourable Damien O'Connor was speaking in the Prime Minister's debate, and he has 3 minutes and 30 seconds remaining. And I did get the message, Mr O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'd just like to briefly acknowledge, I mentioned the existing Speaker for one more day, or thereabouts. I'd like to acknowledge his huge contribution to Parliament since 1984. One of the most significant things he did, of course, was play in the parliamentary rugby team, a very worthwhile wing, I think, and Mr Tremaine will acknowledge that. Mr Speaker, I'm here as Labor's primary industry spokesman. I'm here to try and keep the National Government accountable and to try and keep them on track. They were the friend of the rural New Zealander. Well, they're no longer. Mr Speaker, John Key wants to set up a financial hub in New Zealand at the expense of the exporters and traders of this country, at the expense of the people who produce this wealth. Mr Speaker, there are a couple of acronyms I'd like to mention. One is PGP and the other is DCD. Firstly, on PGP, Mr Speaker, the National Government took from rural New Zealanders, from farmers, $700 million that we had allocated for research and development, from innovation and support. They took that money, put it into the coffers to pay for their tax cuts, and they've allocated a new funding grant scheme called PGP. Any analysis, and it's starting to happen now, of that grant scheme will show that a huge amount of money is going to companies that are owned or majority owned by overseas people, by foreign companies. Now, that's in itself not bad, but it does beg the question, can we guarantee benefit for New Zealand taxpayers from investment made in that PGP fund? Mr Speaker, we will be pursuing that and keeping the government honest in that area. The next one is DCD. There was a rather vicious attack from the CEO of Fonterra on myself for daring to ask questions of why it took so long from September until the end of January to raise the issue of DCD in milk. It is not a food safety issue. It is, however, an issue of integrity, honesty and openness with our trading partners. Now, the reality is that the company and Ravensdown spoke to the Ministry of Primary Industries at the end of October. So there was a little bit of a delay there. At that time, the government was informed. The question I have of the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Trade and the Prime Minister, why did they not act then, up front, telling our trade partners this was not a food safety issue, but it is an issue that we want to clarify with you? That delay, the procrastination, the attempt to hide it, has escalated this into an issue which is a huge challenge at this point for the dairy industry to deal with. No food safety issue, but an issue of perception and of integrity and of reputation. Mr Speaker, I put to you that the delay was in part because of the floating of Fonterra units on November the 30th. Mr Speaker, that was a big issue for New Zealand X. It was a big issue for the Prime Minister because he's absolutely committed to the floating of Fonterra and to the strengthening of capital markets in this country. Mr Speaker, that wheeling and dealing by a trader Prime Minister has put our dairy sector at risk, and he should be, Mr Speaker, held to account for that mistake.